Hello again, I am Blunty. So, Anthem. I am 50 hours deep. I'm soaking in the juices of the endgame, and it's time for a re-examination of how I feel about the game. In the beginning, I flip-flopped during the pre-release stage through the private alpha and VIP and public demo periods and finally settled in on the wide launch, spending about 20 hours with it, both live streaming over on Twitch and in my quiet time, going through the core story critical path and enjoying the characters and settings quite a lot. The story itself, and all the little sub-stories of various NPCs unfolding character and world-building stuff, was relatively thin by comparison to narrative-driven single-player games, but still fairly satisfying nonetheless. I grew to like, relate, laugh, and feel sympathy for the various characters, so I'm going to call that good work. The game was never going to have the best story ever written. It's not a game that supports that kind of thing. It's an ongoing game. It was never going to have a beginning, middle, and end, and that was the end all and be all, and see you next time in the sequel. This is an ongoing game, so the story had to be told differently. It's about the world. It's about the characters. It's not about a full and complete narrative. I was expecting that, so I'm okay with what we got. The gameplay itself is filled with satisfying little combat loops, just as I hoped and expected from a game designed to be a nice rhythmic loop pursuit game would be. But now, 30 hours past the end of my drive through the critical path, I have fought my way through hard mode and collected gear and abilities past a 400 gear score to let me be survivable in the Grand Master 1 difficulty, and I'm focusing on a single javelin type still, the Ranger. And I have not yet started even really to drill down into a hyper-specialized set of loadouts. But I'm getting there, I'm on the edge of that, as I gather more and more Grandmaster level gear, hunting, or rather hoping, for the RNG angels to bless my new gear with just the right combination of perks so I can get some searingly devastating synergy between my weapons, abilities, and support gear. And rather importantly, I'm having fun while doing it. Most evenings I'll put in at least an hour or two of time going through the daily quests and legendary contracts and such, and it's been a great way to just wind down at the end of the day. I'm just reaching a point now where Grandmaster difficulty doesn't make me feel like I'm made out of thin sheets of chocolate, but I still feel a good amount of pressure from the difficulty. My gear score has risen to a level where I'm quite survivable, I'm quite useful in the team, I feel powerful and active, and for me this is all kind of meditative. I'm focused on the game and what I'm doing, but I'm not stressed out by it. I'm not at the edge of my seat, barely scraping by. The cyclical rhythm and progression of most missions lets me just relax into the game, but also without it feeling mindless and dull. I still have to think about what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, the order in which I'm doing it, all that kind of stuff. And this sort of balance is exactly what I wanted from a game like this, and in fact is one of the reasons I enjoyed Dauntless so much. But the thing that stopped me from playing Dauntless every evening wasn't the game. It was the lack of active community size and their less than excellent matchmaking system. Meanwhile, Anthem has never, literally never, failed to basically instantly matchmake a full team for whatever I wanted to be doing at the time. And this speaks of a very active and large player base and a really good underpinning set of systems for the matchmaking. And yes, I said large and active player base, despite all the loudmouth rattling you may have seen in provocative headlines claiming the physical only sales are shit, or that player base is either bored or furious or abandoning the game. I have seen no evidence of that in the gameplay itself. There are plenty of players, and like I said, matchmaking is just click your fingers, you're done. You're not sitting there waiting for the little dot and go pling, 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 looking for players. There's always enough players to do what I want to be doing. It's great. There's been several patches fixing many things, but not all of the fun, cramping bugs. Like, for example, I'm still very frequently plopped into quick play matches that are utterly bugged out with absolutely no way to progress the mission at all. No matter what you do, you just have to quit and go back through all those loading screens and start from scratch again. And yes, the loading screens are still there. They're not as bad as they were, but there's still too many of them. But, you get by. For the most part, though, the devs are doing a great job at being responsive and attentive to the community. The servers have been generally great. I see very little downtime. I see very little of the common issues you often see in games like this, and online multiplayer games that is. Rubber banding I've barely seen or experienced, or that other kind of stuff that's common in games that have server issues. They seem pretty solid to me so far. So, Mechanically, I'm finding the game very satisfying. The developers have earned, by way of doing, not just saying, a decent amount of goodwill and faith that things will continue to improve and that they are really truly actively listening and considering the community reactions and ideas in the decisions they are making for the game. Thematically, I'm enjoying the setting very much. The world fiction, the characters, the environments, it's all wonderful. Visually, it's wonderful, of course, as well. Rich and detailed and lush, while the environments aren't all that varied, really, if we're honest with ourselves. We already know the plan is for this world and this map to physically evolve and change over time as more narrative goes forward and more content updates come out. So I'm not too worried about that starting to feel stale anytime soon. And just from a pure gameplay point of view, I'm just loving the power fantasy here. I feel awesome zip-zopping around in my Javelin, the hyper-agility and the seamless way I can move in and around the environment in three-dimensional space. It feels so satisfying. So, for me, as a game, I wanted to kind of fill the gaps between other games, between narrative single-player games that I enjoy so much, of course. A game that I can just pop into for an hour or 3 to chill out in the evenings and always feel like I'm making progress, getting better and stronger and collecting cooler gear. I'm not just doing the grind for the sake of doing the grind. I feel a sense of progression. It's slow progression, as most of these loot chase games will be, but it is progression nonetheless, and that feels good. And it's a game that will progressively dribble out new chunks of content as we go. I can binge on those new chunks of content, then settle back into the gentle, rhythmic grind of a few hours a night, things like that. I'm finding Anthem very satisfying so far, is what I'm saying. Only time will tell if it can hold me in that rhythm. As I mentioned before, Dauntless. It was doing really quite well with that. I was loving my evening session with Dauntless, and Dauntless is both a more streamlined and smaller experience by design, needing to remain super accessible as it is free to play. But Dauntless is also still in early access, and it has yet to reach the consoles as well, which should happen mid to late this year, so it's a PC-only early access indie title. And as that stands, in early access on only one platform, the active community is a bit small to make matchmaking useful in the time zones and times I tend to play it, especially being an Australian. Despite me liking the gameplay, the mission loop, and the loot chase very much in Dauntless, it just couldn't hold on to me yet. I hope it surges significantly as it reaches the full version 1 release and hits the broader market of players on the consoles and such. Hopefully they bring with it crossplay on day 1, because I'd like a chance to go back to it, because I do like it. Meanwhile though, Anthem, by nature of it being much larger and much more visible, just because it's from BioWare and published by EA, and it is presented as a full-price AAA gamer service in line with things like Destiny and the Division franchises, it seems to be much more likely to hold on to a usefully large player base for much, much longer, so we can continue to have this wonderfully seamless matchmaking experience and just being able to do whatever you want to do anytime you want to do it, regardless of whether you have friends or randos in your party, and just get going on it quickly. It's far from a flawless experience, of course. There's some very annoying bugs still. We are still early, you have to remember that. I mean, name a game that's launched without severe bugs on day 1. It's just the world we live in. You don't have to like it, you don't have to accept it, I suppose. There's a lot of tuning to the loot grind experience to be done to balance progression with time and effort a little bit better. There's a general desire in the community for more variety in weapons and loadout choices, even if it's just visually. A lot of people want their guns to look a bit different. I'm sure they won't pass up the opportunity to sell us skins for our weapons at some point in the future. But the devs have heard all that and are talking about it internally and with the player base actively as we go forward. As I mentioned at the start, I'm still focused on a single of the 4 Javelin types. I've barely touched the others at all. And Javelins being what would be character classes in most other games. And there is at least 3 very effective but quite different builds you can drive into that will make this single Javelin play and feel noticeably different in style within itself. And I barely scratched the top of that barrel for min-maxing a god tier loadout any one of those choices. So I'm not too worried about things starting to feel stale there. And even when I do feel like I want to change, there's still 3 other classes to explore, each with noticeably unique opportunities for gameplay style within them, and likely more Javelins to come in future content. So all in all, I'm feeling positive about Anthem, not blindly so. I'm still a little bit cynical about some stuff. It'd still be real easy for them to just balk this up and have a bunch of players abandon them in frustration. But let's just see how things roll out from here. I have some hope. I mean, for crying out loud, I gave Fallout 76 something close to 100 hours and every single chance I could to hold on to me before I finally flailed my arms up in the air like an exasperated muppet and walked away, very likely forever, from that game. So I figure this game has at the very least, earned that much from me as I continue to hunt for that near mythical multiplayer ever game that I can just hook into long term. I tried a few of them, and so far this one feels like it might have the meteor grasp on me. But again, we'll just have to wait and see, won't we? Thanks for watching, I am Blunty, and I will catch you next time.